The mid-19th century was a time of upheaval in Europe, with empires vying for dominance and old rivalries reigniting. The continent was a patchwork of alliances and ambitions, where the fate of nations could shift overnight. Monarchs and ministers plotted in candle-lit chambers, while armies marched through cobblestone streets, their banners fluttering in the wind. The world was changing rapidly, and the balance of power was more fragile than ever before. The Crimean War erupted in 1853, pitting Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire against Russia. What began as a dispute over religious rights in the Holy Land quickly escalated into a full-scale conflict, drawing in the great powers of Europe. The war would soon stretch far beyond its origins, becoming a struggle for influence and survival. At stake was control over strategic regions and the balance of power in Europe. The Black Sea, the Balkans, and the routes to India all hung in the balance, as diplomats and generals maneuvered for advantage. The outcome would shape the destiny of empires for decades to come. For Britain, it was the first major war since the Napoleonic era, fought far from home on the harsh Crimean Peninsula. British soldiers, many of them young and inexperienced, found themselves in a foreign land, facing not only a determined enemy, but also the unforgiving elements. The landscape was bleak and unfamiliar, and the challenges were immense. Soldiers faced not only fierce Russian resistance but also brutal weather and deadly diseases. More died from illness than battle. Freezing winds, muddy trenches, and inadequate supplies turned the campaign into a nightmare. Cholera, dysentery, and typhus swept through the camps, claiming thousands of lives and leaving survivors weakened and demoralized. The main Allied objective: capture the Russian naval base at Sevastopol, the key to Black Sea power. Sevastopol was a fortress bristling with cannons, its harbors filled with Russian warships. Whoever controlled Sevastopol would control the fate of the Black Sea and the surrounding regions. The siege was long and bloody, with new technologies like rifled muskets and the telegraph changing both warfare and public awareness. For the first time, news from the front could reach London and Paris in days, not weeks, and the world watched as the horrors of modern war unfolded. War correspondents and photographers brought the grim reality home, exposing the clash between outdated tactics and modern weaponry. Their reports and images shocked the public, revealing the suffering of ordinary soldiers and the chaos of the battlefield in unprecedented detail. The British Army, though disciplined, suffered from poor leadership and supply issues. Miscommunication, logistical failures, and outdated command structures led to confusion and hardship at every turn. The men in the trenches often paid the price for mistakes made far from the front lines. Amidst this chaos, during the siege of Sevastopol, a legendary and tragic event was about to unfold: the charge of the Light Brigade. It would become one of the most famous moments in military history, remembered for both its bravery and its blunder. The world would soon witness a moment that would define both the horror and the heroism of war. The courage of the men who rode into the Valley of Death would echo through history, immortalized in poetry, art, and memory. The stage was set for disaster and for legend. In the frozen fields of Crimea, the fate of hundreds would be decided in a matter of minutes, and the world would never forget what happened next. On October 25, 1854, the Russians launched a major assault near Balaclava, threatening the British supply base. The battle raged across valleys and ridges, with Turkish soldiers manning small forts along the heights. Russian forces overwhelmed the redoubts, capturing British guns and threatening to cut off the Allies. As Russian cavalry advanced, the British Heavy Brigade, led by General Scarlett, charged uphill and miraculously drove them back. This triumph was short-lived. From his vantage point, Lord Raglan saw Russians preparing to remove captured British guns and decided to act. He ordered the Light Brigade to intervene, hoping to prevent a humiliating loss. The order, however, was vague and poorly communicated. What followed would become one of the most infamous moments in military history. The fate of the Light Brigade was sealed by confusion and haste. A legendary disaster was about to unfold. The Light Brigade, 670 elite cavalrymen, waited for orders, led by the proud Earl of Cardigan. The command to charge arrived, delivered by Captain Nolan, but the order was unclear. From their position, the only visible guns were at the end of a valley lined with Russian artillery, a deadly gauntlet. Lord Lucan, confused, questioned Nolan, who impatiently gestured toward the wrong target. Bound by duty, Cardigan prepared his men, aware of the peril. At 2:20 p.m., the bugle sounded. Cardigan gave the simple command, "The brigade will advance." The cavalry surged forward straight into a mile-long corridor of fire. Onlookers watched in horror as the Light Brigade galloped into the valley. A French general famously remarked, "It is magnificent, but it is not war, it is madness." The charge of the Light Brigade had begun, an act of courage and confusion. The world held its breath. The disaster stemmed from a chain of miscommunication and rivalry among commanders, a tragic sequence of events that would lead to one of the most infamous moments in military history. Lord Raglan, from his high vantage point, intended the cavalry to attack Russians on the Causeway Heights. His perspective, however, was not shared by those on the ground. His written order was dangerously vague, failing to specify which guns or enemy. This lack of clarity would prove to be a fatal flaw. Captain Nolan, tasked with delivering the message, was impulsive and frustrated with his superiors. His impatience and disdain for the chain of command only added to the confusion. Lord Lucan, unable to see the battlefield clearly, interpreted the order as an attack on the guns at the end of the valley. His misinterpretation was a critical error. When Lucan questioned Nolan, Nolan's impatient gesture pointed the brigade toward disaster. The lack of clear communication between them sealed the fate of the cavalry. Cardigan, despite grave doubts, obeyed the order without question. His sense of duty and discipline overrode his better judgment. The result? The Light Brigade charged into the wrong valley, directly into a deadly crossfire. The scene was one of chaos and carnage. Nolan himself was among the first to fall, killed by an exploding shell. His death was a grim testament to the miscommunication that had led them there. The tragedy was a perfect storm of vague orders, personal animosity, and fatal assumptions. Each misstep compounded the previous one. No one intervened to stop the madness. The chain of command was paralyzed by confusion and fear. The fate of the Light Brigade was sealed by human error. Their bravery was overshadowed by the blunders that led them to their doom. The cost would be devastating. Lives were lost, and the event would be remembered as a tragic example of the horrors of war. As the Light Brigade charged forward into the valley, the thunder of hooves and the glint of sabers filled the air. These men, mounted atop their horses, rode with unwavering resolve, knowing full well the peril that awaited them. Russian cannons and riflemen unleashed a storm of fire from three sides, turning the valley into a deadly gauntlet of smoke, shrapnel, and chaos. Men and horses fell in droves, struck down by relentless gunfire and exploding shells, their sacrifice painting the ground with tragedy. Yet the survivors pressed on, closing ranks and riding into the jaws of death, their courage unbroken even as the world seemed to collapse around them. Against all odds, a handful reached the Russian guns, their charge carrying them straight into the heart of enemy fire. There, they engaged in desperate hand-to-hand combat, sabers clashing with bayonets. Surrounded and outnumbered, the British cavalry fought with every ounce of strength and determination they had left. Realizing the futility of their position, they had no choice but to retreat, battered and bloodied, but not broken in spirit. The survivors turned back, running a second gauntlet of fire, dodging bullets and cannon shot as they raced for safety. The return was as deadly as the charge itself, with chaos and confusion claiming even more lives in the desperate withdrawal. Russian lancers gave chase, determined to cut down the retreating cavalry before they could escape the Valley of Death. The courage of the Light Brigade was extraordinary. Ordinary men following orders, knowing the odds, yet refusing to yield to fear or despair. Their discipline and loyalty became legendary, a testament to the unbreakable bond between comrades in arms. Even as the charge itself was a military catastrophe, the world would come to admire their steadfastness in the face of disaster. The world would remember their bravery, not the blunder, honoring the fallen as heroes rather than victims of miscommunication. The charge became a symbol of valor in the face of certain death, inspiring generations to come with its tale of sacrifice and heroism. Their sacrifice would echo through history, a reminder of the price paid for duty and honor. The legend of the 600 was born, forever etched into the annals of military history. When the survivors returned, the scale of the disaster was clear. Of 670 men, nearly 250 were killed or wounded, almost 40% lost in minutes. Hundreds of horses lay dead, rendering the brigade useless as a fighting force. The regiments were shattered, morale devastated, blame spread quickly. Raglan blamed Lucan, Lucan blamed Nolan and Raglan. Cardigan claimed he simply followed orders. The charge achieved nothing militarily. The original guns were lost and the Light Brigade was destroyed for no gain. The event became a textbook example of leadership failure and the tragic cost of miscommunication. Only the story of the soldiers' courage survived the day. The charge of the Light Brigade was a disaster, heroic but utterly futile. Its legacy would haunt the British Army for years. The world mourned the loss and questioned the leaders. News of the charge reached Britain quickly, shocking the public with tales of heroism and blunder. War correspondents like William Howard Russell exposed both the bravery of the soldiers and the incompetence of their commanders. The nation was torn between pride in the Light Brigade's courage and outrage at the leadership's failure. The charge became a symbol of both British grit and military folly. Public debate raged, demanding reform and accountability. The event highlighted the deep divide between ordinary soldiers and privileged officers. For the first time, the press shaped public opinion on war, fueling calls for change. The charge of the Light Brigade became a national reckoning. Inspired by the news, poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade. His poem, published in December 1854, immortalized the event as a tale of courage and duty. With its galloping rhythm and famous lines, "Theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die." The poem captured the spirit of the soldiers. Tennyson's words transformed a military blunder into a legend of heroism. The poem became an instant classic, shaping how generations remembered the charge. It allowed the public to mourn and celebrate, focusing on bravery over blame. The Valley of Death entered the language as a symbol of sacrifice. Tennyson's tribute ensured the Light Brigade would never be forgotten. The charge of the Light Brigade became a lasting symbol of both courage and catastrophe. Public outrage over the blunder led to reforms, including the end of buying officer commissions. The event underscored the need for clear communication and competent leadership in war. Tennyson's poem and the press coverage gave the charge a powerful cultural legacy. The story endures as a metaphor for bravery in hopeless situations, and for the dangers of blind obedience. The Crimean War marked a turning point in how wars were reported and understood. The 600 who rode into the valley left a legacy of valor and a warning about the cost of command failure. Their story reminds us that history is shaped by both the courage of individuals and the errors of leaders.